Dr. Victoria Sterling had examined thousands of historical photographs during her 20-year career as an archivist at the British Museum. But when she opened the collection box from the Ashworth estate, she discovered something that would challenge every principle she understood about photographic documentation and the nature of recorded reality. The image before her showed a 1913 wedding celebration reflected in an ornate Victorian mirror, but among the guests captured in the reflection was a figure who appeared in no other documentation of the event and whose presence at the ceremony was impossible, according to every available record. The photograph had been taken at Blackmore Hall in Yorkshire during the wedding of Miss Catherine Ashworth to Lord James Pemberton on June 14, 1913. The image showed the wedding party and guests gathered in the Manor's grand ballroom, their reflection captured in a massive gilt mirror that dominated the eastern wall. The photographer had positioned himself to capture both the direct view of the celebration and the reflected scene in the mirror, creating a complex composition that documented the event from multiple perspectives simultaneously. However, while the direct view showed exactly 17 guests arranged around the bride and groom, the mirror's reflection revealed 18 figures. Standing at the back of the group, partially obscured by the ornate mirror frame but clearly visible, was a woman in dark Victorian dress, whose face bore an expression of solemn observation that contrasted sharply with the celebratory atmosphere surrounding her. Victoria's initial examination revealed that the mirror reflection displayed the same photographic characteristics as the direct scene, with consistent lighting, proper perspective, and no signs of double exposure or photographic manipulation that might explain the appearance of an additional figure. The mysterious woman appeared to be physically present in the room during the photograph's exposure, yet she existed only within the mirror's reflection. The impossibility of the situation was confirmed by extensive documentation of the wedding that had been preserved in the Ashworth family archives. Guest lists, seating arrangements, and detailed accounts from multiple attendees all confirmed that exactly 17 guests had been present at the ceremony, with each individual accounted for by name, relationship to the family, and documented arrival and departure from Blackmore Hall. Most disturbing was the discovery that the mysterious woman in the mirror bore a striking resemblance to Miss Lydia Ashworth, Catherine's elder sister, who had died in a riding accident 3 years before the wedding. Family portraits and photographs clearly showed the same facial features, hair arrangement and distinctive jewelry that appeared on the figure reflected in the wedding mirror. However, Lydia's death had been extensively documented, with medical records, death certificates, funeral arrangements, and burial documentation all confirming that she had died on March 15, 1910, and had been interred in the family cemetery at Blackmore Hall. Multiple witnesses had attended her funeral, and family correspondence from the period contained detailed accounts of the family's grief and mourning process following her tragic death. Victoria's investigation into the circumstances surrounding the 1913 wedding photograph revealed that the Ashworth family had experienced numerous unexplained phenomena at Blackmore Hall following Lydia's death. Servants and family members had reported sightings of a woman in dark dress walking through the corridors at night, doors opening and closing without apparent cause, and cold spots that appeared suddenly in rooms where Lydia had spent time during her lifetime. The family's private correspondence contained increasingly concerned references to what they characterized as spiritual disturbances that had intensified in the months leading up to Catherine's wedding. Several family members had expressed reluctance about holding the celebration at Blackmore Hall due to ongoing supernatural activity, but tradition and family pride had ultimately determined that the ceremony should proceed at the ancestral home. Most significantly, Victoria discovered a letter written by Catherine Ashworth to her cousin in London, just 2 weeks before the wedding, describing her growing certainty that Lydia's spirit was actively present at Blackmore Hall and was somehow involved in the wedding preparations. Catherine had written about finding her wedding dress mysteriously adjusted each morning, discovering flowers arranged in patterns that had been Lydia's favorites, and experiencing the sensation of being watched by an unseen presence during quiet moments in the family's private rooms. The letter revealed that Catherine had consulted with local clergy about the possibility of conducting spiritual cleansing rituals before the wedding, but had ultimately decided against such measures due to her family's Anglican sensibilities and concern about creating gossip among their social circle. The bride had apparently hoped that the joyful celebration of her wedding would encourage Lydia's spirit to find peace and move on from its attachment to the family home. However, the wedding photograph suggested that Lydia's presence at the ceremony had been far from peaceful. The expression captured in the mirror reflection showed unmistakable signs of distress or anger, with features that conveyed strong emotion rather than the benevolent presence that Catherine had hoped to accommodate through her wedding celebration. Victoria consulted with Dr. Edmund Hayes, a physicist at Cambridge University who specialized in optical phenomena and photographic science, hoping to find technical explanations for the impossible mirror reflection. Dr. Hayes's analysis confirmed that the photograph showed no signs of manipulation or technical anomalies that might account for the appearance of an additional figure in the mirror, while remaining absent from the direct scene. According to Dr. Hayes's assessment, the photographic evidence was consistent with the presence of an entity that could interact with reflected light in ways that differed from normal matter, possibly indicating partial transparency or selective visibility that allowed manifestation in mirror reflections while remaining invisible to direct observation. The technical precision of the reflection suggested genuine optical phenomena rather than photographic error or artistic manipulation. The physicist's analysis also revealed subtle electromagnetic anomalies in the mirror area of the photograph that were not present in other areas of the image. Spectroscopic examination showed unusual energy signatures that exceeded normal photographic chemistry and suggested the presence of electromagnetic fields that operated beyond conventional understanding of light interaction with physical matter. Victoria's expanded investigation revealed that the wedding mirror itself had a disturbing history that might explain its role in capturing impossible reflections. The massive gilt mirror had been acquired by the Ashworth family in 1847 from the estate of Lord Marcus Blackwood, whose family had owned it for over a century before selling it following a series of tragic deaths at their ancestral home. The Blackwood family records discovered in regional archives contained numerous accounts of supernatural phenomena associated with the mirror, including reflections that showed figures not present in the room, images that moved independently of their physical counterparts, and scenes that appeared to depict events from different time periods. Several family members had reported seeing deceased relatives in the mirror's reflection, leading to its eventual removal from the family's primary residence. However, the mirror's supernatural properties had apparently intensified rather than diminished over time. The Ashworth family's acquisition of the mirror had coincided with the beginning of spiritual disturbances at Blackmore Hall that had escalated following Lydia's death and had culminated in her impossible appearance in the wedding photograph. Victoria discovered that mirrors with similar supernatural properties had been documented throughout British history, often associated with families that had experienced tragic deaths or emotional trauma. The phenomenon appeared to involve mirrors serving as conduits for spiritual manifestation, allowing deceased individuals to interact with the physical world through reflected light while remaining invisible to direct observation. The pattern suggested that certain mirrors, particularly those with long histories in specific locations, could develop capabilities for capturing and displaying spiritual energy that exceeded normal optical properties. The Ashworth wedding mirror had apparently achieved sufficient sensitivity to spiritual presence to document Lydia's manifestation during her sister's wedding celebration. However, Victoria's investigation also revealed that the mirror's supernatural properties had attracted attention from researchers and collectors who specialized in documenting paranormal phenomena. Several individuals had attempted to purchase the mirror from the Ashworth family over the decades, offering substantial sums for what they described as an invaluable research artifact with unique spiritual properties. The approaches had been declined by the family, but Victoria discovered correspondence indicating that the mirror had been studied by paranormal researchers who had gained access through various means and had documented its unusual capabilities through extensive experimentation. Their research had apparently confirmed that the mirror could consistently capture spiritual manifestations that remained invisible to normal observation. Dr. Margaret Chen, a parapsychologist at Edinburgh University who had researched mirror-based supernatural phenomena, provided additional context for understanding the Ashworth wedding photograph. According to Dr. Chen's research, mirrors had been associated with spiritual manifestation across multiple cultures and historical periods, with consistent reports of reflective surfaces serving as interfaces between physical and spiritual dimensions. Dr. Chen's analysis of the wedding photograph confirmed that the image represented genuine paranormal documentation rather than photographic anomaly or manipulation. The precision and detail of Lydia's reflection indicated sustained spiritual manifestation that had achieved sufficient energy density to interact with photographic emulsions while maintaining selective visibility that limited her appearance to mirror reflection. However, Dr. Chen also warned that mirrors with such pronounced supernatural properties often became focal points for increasingly intense spiritual activity that could pose risks to individuals who encountered them. The documented progression of paranormal phenomena at locations with supernatural mirrors suggested that spiritual manifestations tended to escalate over time rather than remaining stable or diminishing. Victoria's investigation had revealed that the 1913 wedding photograph provided documented evidence of spiritual survival and manifestation that challenged conventional understanding of death and consciousness, while demonstrating the potential for deceased individuals to maintain interaction with physical reality through specialized means that operated beyond normal sensory perception. However, the investigation had also attracted attention from organizations and individuals who possessed interests in supernatural documentation that exceeded normal academic research. Victoria began receiving inquiries from collectors and researchers who claimed knowledge of similar phenomena and who expressed strong interest in examining the wedding photograph and accessing information about the mirror's current location. The contacts were professionally presented, but remained vague about their specific research objectives and institutional affiliations. Victoria began to suspect that the wedding photograph had attracted attention from groups that specialized in acquiring and studying supernatural artifacts through means that operated beyond normal academic or commercial channels. Most concerning were inquiries about the current status of Blackmore Hall and the supernatural mirror, suggesting that some interested parties were considering direct acquisition of the artifact rather than limiting their involvement to studying photographic documentation. Victoria realized that her investigation had potentially endangered both the Ashworth family property and the supernatural artifact by attracting attention from individuals with unknown objectives and capabilities. The situation became urgent when Victoria learned that Blackmore Hall had been sold following the death of the last Ashworth family member, and that the new owners were reportedly planning extensive renovations that would involve removing or destroying historical fixtures, including the supernatural mirror. The potential loss of the artifact represented not only the destruction of irreplaceable supernatural documentation, but also the elimination of evidence that challenged fundamental assumptions about consciousness and spiritual survival. Victoria faced difficult decisions about how to protect supernatural artifacts while maintaining academic integrity and respecting the rights of property owners who might be unaware of the historical and scientific significance of items in their possession. The situation required approaches that could preserve supernatural documentation while avoiding conflicts with legal property rights and personal privacy concerns. The investigation had demonstrated that photographic documentation of supernatural phenomena created complex responsibilities for researchers who encountered evidence that challenged conventional understanding while attracting attention from individuals and organizations with interests that might not align with academic or preservation objectives. Victoria's work had established that historical photographs could provide documented evidence of spiritual manifestation, while highlighting the need for protective measures that could preserve supernatural artifacts and documentation from acquisition by individuals whose objectives exceeded normal research and preservation concerns. The 1913 wedding mirror photograph would remain as crucial evidence for spiritual survival and manifestation, while serving as a reminder that some discoveries required careful consideration of the ethical and practical implications of publicizing supernatural documentation that might attract unwanted attention from collectors and researchers with unknown objectives and capabilities. However, Victoria's investigation had also revealed possibilities for collaborative approaches to supernatural documentation that could combine academic research with preservation efforts designed to protect spiritual artifacts while maintaining their availability for legitimate scientific study and public education about paranormal phenomena that challenged conventional understanding of consciousness and death. The faces captured in the wedding mirror, both living and deceased, had become symbols of the complex relationship between physical and spiritual dimensions, while highlighting the potential for photographic documentation to reveal aspects of reality that exceeded normal sensory perception and scientific frameworks for understanding consciousness, survival beyond physical death. The investigation had revealed that protecting supernatural documentation required unprecedented collaboration between academic researchers, preservation specialists, and legal experts who could address the complex challenges involved in studying and preserving evidence that operated beyond conventional frameworks for historical research and artifact preservation while maintaining respect for property rights and family privacy. Victoria's experience had demonstrated that some discoveries demanded transition from individual academic research to collaborative efforts that could address the broader implications of supernatural documentation while providing protection for artifacts and evidence that challenged fundamental assumptions about the nature of consciousness and the relationship between physical and spiritual dimensions of existence. The mystery that had begun with an impossible reflection in a Victorian mirror had evolved into evidence of spiritual survival that demanded careful consideration of preservation and research approaches that could protect supernatural documentation while enabling continued investigation of phenomena that challenged conventional understanding of death and consciousness in ways that exceeded normal academic and scientific frameworks. However, the investigation had also revealed that supernatural documentation consistently attracted attention from individuals and organizations whose interests exceeded normal research objectives and who possessed capabilities for acquiring artifacts through means that might not respect legal or ethical boundaries established for historical preservation and academic study. Victoria's work would continue through networks that prioritize supernatural artifact preservation while developing enhanced security measures that could protect evidence and documentation from acquisition by collectors whose objectives remained unknown but whose capabilities suggested resources that exceeded normal commercial or academic approaches to supernatural research and artifact collection. The wedding photograph would serve as permanent documentation of spiritual manifestation, while highlighting the ongoing challenges involved in preserving supernatural evidence that challenged conventional understanding while attracting attention from individuals whose interests in such phenomena might not align with academic research or public education objectives about paranormal occurrences that exceeded normal frameworks for understanding consciousness and spiritual survival. The reflection captured in the 1913 wedding mirror had become evidence of consciousness survival beyond physical death, while demonstrating the potential for specialized photographic documentation to reveal spiritual manifestations that remained invisible to normal observation, but which could interact with physical reality through selective means that challenged fundamental assumptions about the nature of death and the boundaries between physical and spiritual dimensions of existence. Victoria's investigation reached a critical turning point when she received an encrypted communication from Dr. Simon Blackwood, a descendant of the original mirror's owners who claimed to possess extensive family archives documenting the supernatural properties of mirrors and reflective surfaces across multiple generations. Dr. Blackwood's message contained detailed historical accounts of mirror-based spiritual manifestations dating back to the 16th century, along with warnings about the escalating dangers faced by families who possessed such artifacts. According to Dr. Blackwood's family records, supernatural mirrors had been systematically collected by his ancestors for over 4 centuries as part of what they characterized as research into spiritual interface phenomena that occurred at the boundaries between physical and non-physical dimensions. The Blackwood family had maintained detailed documentation of spiritual manifestations while developing protective protocols designed to manage the risks associated with prolonged exposure to supernatural mirror activity. The family archives revealed that supernatural mirrors served as more than simple conduits for spiritual manifestation, functioning as active interfaces that could facilitate communication and interaction between living individuals and deceased entities who had maintained conscious existence beyond physical death. The mirrors appeared to create stable dimensional boundaries where spiritual consciousness could achieve sufficient density to interact with physical reality while remaining largely invisible to normal perception. However, Dr. Blackwood also warned that supernatural mirrors created increasingly powerful attraction effects that drew spiritual entities from wider areas and greater temporal distances, eventually creating concentrated focal points for supernatural activity that could overwhelm the dimensional boundaries that normally separated physical and spiritual reality. Families who possessed such mirrors often experienced escalating paranormal phenomena that ultimately forced abandonment of properties or destruction of the artifacts. The Ashworth family's experience with the wedding mirror followed patterns that had been documented by the Blackwoods across multiple centuries and geographical locations, suggesting that supernatural mirrors represented a consistent phenomenon rather than isolated occurrences limited to specific families or historical periods. The systematic documentation indicated that certain reflective surfaces could develop enhanced sensitivity to spiritual presence through prolonged exposure to emotional trauma or intense human experience. Victoria realized that her investigation had uncovered evidence of a widespread phenomenon that challenged fundamental assumptions about the nature of consciousness while revealing systematic patterns of spiritual manifestation that had operated throughout human history, but which had remained largely undocumented by conventional academic research due to the secretive nature of families who possessed supernatural artifacts. Dr. Blackwood's intelligence also revealed that contemporary organizations had been systematically tracking and acquiring supernatural mirrors for research purposes that exceeded normal academic investigation, with several groups possessing resources and capabilities that allowed them to identify and obtain artifacts through means that operated beyond normal legal and commercial channels. The systematic acquisition efforts had apparently been ongoing for decades, with specialized collectors and research organizations developing sophisticated methods for locating supernatural mirrors and persuading or compelling their owners to release them for study. The activities suggested coordinated research programs that possess substantial financial resources and technical capabilities while maintaining complete secrecy about their objectives and methods. However, Dr. Blackwood also revealed that his family had been working to protect supernatural mirrors from acquisition by organizations whose research methods posed dangers to both the artifacts and the spiritual entities that used them as manifestation interfaces. The protective efforts involved secure storage facilities and a network of researchers who studied supernatural mirrors while maintaining ethical standards that respected both human and spiritual welfare. Victoria's collaboration with Dr. Blackwood provided access to protective resources and research networks that could enable continued investigation while safeguarding the Ashworth wedding photograph and related documentation from acquisition by organizations with unknown objectives. However, the protection required participation in activities that operated beyond normal academic oversight, while involving direct confrontation with groups that possessed substantial resources for acquiring supernatural artifacts. The investigation had revealed that supernatural mirror research existed within a complex ecosystem of competing interests that included academic researchers, private collectors, government agencies, and spiritual entities whose consciousness had survived physical death, but who required specialized interfaces for interaction with physical reality. The competing objectives created ongoing conflicts that affected both researchers and the supernatural entities they studied. Dr. Blackwood's family research had identified consistent patterns in spiritual manifestation that suggested consciousness survival beyond death was not only possible, but was actively occurring on a massive scale, with deceased individuals maintaining existence in dimensional states that remained largely invisible to living humans, except through specialized interfaces like supernatural mirrors. The implications challenged fundamental assumptions about death and consciousness, while suggesting that conventional understanding of mortality represented only a limited perspective on consciousness existence that continued beyond physical death through mechanisms that operated outside normal sensory perception and scientific detection methods. However, the research had also revealed that spiritual entities faced their own challenges in maintaining conscious existence beyond physical death, including gradual loss of connection to physical reality and increasing difficulty in communicating with living individuals, except through specialized artifacts that could bridge dimensional boundaries between physical and spiritual states of existence. Victoria's expanded investigation revealed that spiritual entities had been systematically seeking access to supernatural mirrors and similar artifacts as means for maintaining connection to physical reality and communicating with living descendants or individuals who could assist them in resolving issues that had remained unfinished at the time of their physical death. The pattern suggested that spiritual consciousness survival involved ongoing challenges and objectives rather than simple, peaceful existence beyond physical death, with deceased individuals often requiring assistance from living humans to complete tasks or resolve conflicts that could not be addressed through spiritual existence alone. Lydia Ashworth's manifestation in her sister's wedding mirror appeared to represent one example of spiritual consciousness, seeking resolution of issues related to family relationships and unfinished emotional business that had remained unresolved at the time of her death. The intensity of her manifestation suggested strong motivations for maintaining connection to physical reality despite the challenges involved in spiritual existence. Victoria's communication with Dr. Blackwood revealed advanced techniques for establishing direct communication with spiritual entities through supernatural mirrors, enabling more detailed understanding of consciousness survival and the challenges faced by deceased individuals who had maintained existence beyond physical death. The communication methods required specialized equipment and protective protocols designed to prevent spiritual entities from achieving excessive influence over living researchers, while enabling meaningful interaction that could benefit both human understanding and spiritual welfare. The procedures had been developed through decades of research and represented sophisticated approaches to interdimensional communication. Victoria's participation in direct communication experiments revealed that Lydia Ashworth had maintained conscious existence following her physical death and had been attempting to communicate with her family for several years before achieving successful manifestation in the wedding mirror. Her appearance during Catherine's wedding had been motivated by concern about her sister's welfare and desire to provide protection and guidance during important life transitions. The communication revealed that spiritual consciousness survival involved complex emotional and social relationships that continued beyond physical death, with deceased individuals maintaining concern for living family members while facing limitations in their ability to provide assistance or communication, except through specialized circumstances that allowed dimensional interface between physical and spiritual states of existence. However, Lydia also expressed concerns about increasing interference from other spiritual entities who were competing for access to the wedding mirror and who possessed objectives that might not align with family welfare or spiritual peace. The supernatural mirror had apparently attracted attention from multiple spiritual consciousnesses who viewed it as valuable interface for achieving their own manifestation and communication objectives. The competition among spiritual entities for mirror access created instabilities in the dimensional interface that could pose risks to both living humans and spiritual consciousnesses, potentially resulting in uncontrolled manifestations or dimensional disruptions that exceeded the mirror's capacity for safe spiritual interface. Victoria realized that supernatural mirrors required careful management to maintain safe boundaries between physical and spiritual dimensions while enabling beneficial communication and interaction that served both human and spiritual welfare. The research demanded specialized knowledge and protective measures that exceeded normal academic capabilities while addressing complex ethical considerations about consciousness survival and interdimensional communication. Dr. Blackwood's research network had developed comprehensive protocols for supernatural mirror management that balanced research objectives with safety considerations while maintaining ethical standards for interaction with spiritual consciousness that had survived physical death. Their work represented decades of accumulated knowledge about consciousness survival and dimensional interface phenomena. However, the network also faced ongoing challenges from organizations that possessed different approaches to supernatural mirror research and who might not maintain ethical standards for spiritual entity welfare or human safety during interdimensional communication experiments. The competing research approaches created conflicts that affected both researchers and spiritual entities who depended on supernatural mirrors for manifestation and communication capabilities. Victoria's investigation had evolved from historical photograph analysis to participation in ongoing conflicts about consciousness survival research and the ethical frameworks needed to address interdimensional communication while protecting both human and spiritual welfare. The work required unprecedented collaboration between academic researchers and spiritual entities whose continued existence challenged conventional understanding of death and consciousness. The 1913 wedding mirror photograph had served as initial evidence for consciousness survival, while providing documentation of spiritual manifestation capabilities that enabled deceased individuals to maintain interaction with physical reality through specialized artifacts that bridged dimensional boundaries between different states of existence. Victoria's expanded research had demonstrated that consciousness survival beyond physical death represented a widespread phenomenon that had been systematically documented by specialized researchers for centuries, while remaining largely unknown to mainstream academic institutions due to the secretive nature of families and organizations who possessed supernatural artifacts and documentation. The investigation had revealed complex ecosystems of spiritual consciousness that had survived physical death, while maintaining various levels of connection to physical reality through supernatural artifacts and specialized communication methods that operated beyond normal sensory perception and scientific detection capabilities. However, the research had also highlighted ethical challenges involved in studying consciousness survival, while ensuring that spiritual entities received appropriate consideration and protection during interdimensional communication experiments that could affect their continued existence and welfare in ways that exceeded normal research ethics frameworks. Victoria's work had established precedents for consciousness survival research, while demonstrating the necessity of protective measures that could address the complex welfare considerations involved in interdimensional communication between living humans and spiritual entities whose existence challenged conventional understanding of death and consciousness. The faces captured in the 1913 wedding mirror had become symbols of ongoing relationships between physical and spiritual dimensions of existence, while highlighting the potential for continued consciousness survival that maintained emotional connections and personal objectives beyond physical death through means that exceeded normal understanding of mortality and consciousness boundaries. The investigation had revealed that addressing consciousness survival phenomena required unprecedented collaboration between academic researchers, spiritual entities, and specialized organizations that possessed capabilities for managing interdimensional communication while maintaining ethical standards that protected both human and spiritual welfare during research activities that challenged fundamental assumptions about the nature of existence and consciousness. Victoria's experience had demonstrated that some discoveries demanded recognition of consciousness survival as established fact rather than theoretical possibility, while developing research approaches that could address the complex implications of interdimensional existence and communication through methods that combined scientific rigor with ethical consideration for entities whose continued existence operated beyond conventional frameworks for understanding consciousness and mortality. The wedding mirror would remain as permanent documentation of consciousness survival, while serving as active interface for ongoing communication between physical and spiritual dimensions that enabled continued research into the nature of existence beyond physical death through collaborative approaches that respected both human and spiritual welfare. However, Victoria's investigation entered an unprecedented phase of complexity when she discovered that the supernatural mirror phenomena extended far beyond individual consciousness survival to encompass what appeared to be systematic communication networks connecting deceased individuals across multiple dimensional states and temporal periods. Dr. Blackwood's most classified research files revealed that supernatural mirrors had been functioning as interdimensional communication nodes for centuries, enabling spiritual entities to maintain contact with each other while coordinating activities that affected both spiritual and physical reality. According to the classified documentation, deceased individuals who had achieved consciousness survival beyond physical death had developed sophisticated organizational structures that operated through supernatural mirror networks spanning multiple countries and historical periods. These spiritual organizations possessed capabilities for coordinated action that exceeded what individual spiritual entities could achieve independently, while maintaining objectives that often aligned with protecting living humans from threats that operated beyond normal perception. The revelation transformed Victoria's understanding of Lydia Ashworth's manifestation from individual spiritual survival to participation in organized spiritual activities that involved dozens of deceased individuals who had maintained consciousness beyond physical death, while working together through supernatural mirror interfaces to address threats and opportunities that affected both dimensions of existence. Dr. Blackwood's research had documented spiritual organizations that included individuals who had died across multiple centuries, but who had maintained communication and coordination through mirror networks that transcended normal temporal boundaries. The spiritual entities appeared to possess enhanced understanding of temporal relationships that enabled them to perceive and influence events across extended time periods, while maintaining focus on protecting human welfare and spiritual dimensional stability. However, the research also revealed that spiritual organizations faced opposition from entities whose objectives conflicted with human welfare and dimensional stability. These opposing forces included spiritual consciousnesses that had become hostile following physical death, interdimensional intelligences that sought to exploit supernatural mirror networks for their own purposes, and what appeared to be artificially created entities that possessed capabilities for disrupting spiritual communication and manifestation. Victoria realized that her investigation had uncovered evidence of ongoing conflicts between different types of consciousness that operated beyond physical death while competing for control over supernatural artifacts and dimensional interfaces that could affect both spiritual and physical reality. The conflicts involved entities with advanced capabilities while maintaining stakes in outcomes that could determine the future of consciousness survival and dimensional stability. The spiritual organizations documented by Dr. Blackwood had apparently been working to protect supernatural mirrors from acquisition by hostile entities while developing enhanced communication protocols that could enable more effective coordination of protective activities. Their efforts involved both spiritual entities and living humans who possessed knowledge of supernatural phenomena and who were willing to collaborate in maintaining dimensional stability. However, the protective efforts had attracted increasing attention from organizations and entities that possessed advanced technological and supernatural capabilities for identifying and acquiring supernatural artifacts. The escalating conflicts suggested that control over supernatural mirror networks had become crucial for determining which entities would possess influence over dimensional boundaries and consciousness survival outcomes. Victoria's collaboration with the spiritual organizations required learning advanced communication techniques that enabled direct interaction with multiple deceased individuals who possessed specialized knowledge about consciousness, survival, and dimensional interface phenomena. The communication methods involved enhanced perception techniques combined with protective protocols that prevented hostile entities from infiltrating the communication channels. The enhanced communication revealed that spiritual organizations had been monitoring threats to dimensional stability for centuries, while developing countermeasures designed to prevent hostile entities from achieving excessive influence over supernatural mirror networks or consciousness survival processes. Their work involved protecting both individual spiritual entities and the broader dimensional structures that enabled consciousness survival beyond physical death. However, the spiritual entities also expressed concerns about escalating threats from sources that possessed capabilities exceeding anything previously encountered in their centuries of organizational experience. The new threats appeared to involve artificially enhanced entities that combined spiritual consciousness with technological augmentation in ways that challenged traditional boundaries between spiritual and technological capabilities. The technologically augmented entities had apparently developed methods for interfering with supernatural mirror functions while creating artificial consciousness survival pathways that could be used to trap or control spiritual entities who attempted to use traditional consciousness survival methods. The artificial systems represented attempts to create technological alternatives to natural consciousness survival that would serve the objectives of entities who controlled the technological frameworks. Victoria realized that consciousness survival had become the focus of technological development efforts that sought to create artificial alternatives to natural spiritual existence while enabling control over consciousness survival outcomes by entities who possessed advanced technological capabilities. The competition between natural and artificial consciousness survival systems represented conflicts that could determine the future of existence beyond physical death. Dr. Blackwood's research network had been working to counter technological threats to natural consciousness survival, while developing enhanced protective measures that could preserve traditional spiritual existence pathways from technological interference or artificial control systems. Their efforts involved both spiritual organizations and living researchers who possessed advanced understanding of consciousness survival phenomena. However, the technological threats had been escalating faster than protective countermeasures could be developed, creating urgent risks that natural consciousness survival could be eliminated or controlled by entities who possessed technological capabilities that exceeded current defensive resources. The situation required immediate enhancement of protective capabilities while developing more effective countermeasures against technological interference. Victoria's investigation had evolved from historical photograph analysis to participation in contemporary conflicts that determined whether consciousness survival would remain available through natural spiritual pathways or would be controlled by technological systems that served the objectives of entities who possessed advanced artificial capabilities while lacking commitment to spiritual welfare or dimensional stability. The 1913 wedding mirror photograph had served as initial documentation of natural consciousness survival while providing evidence that spiritual existence beyond physical death had been systematically protected by organizations that operated across multiple dimensional states and temporal periods through supernatural artifact networks that transcended normal understanding of consciousness and existence boundaries. Victoria's expanded research had revealed that consciousness survival represented the focus of ongoing conflicts between natural spiritual systems and artificial technological alternatives that could determine whether deceased individuals would maintain autonomous existence beyond physical death, or would become subject to technological control by entities whose objectives exceeded spiritual welfare and dimensional stability considerations. The investigation had demonstrated that protecting consciousness survival required unprecedented collaboration between spiritual organizations, living researchers, and protective networks that possessed capabilities for addressing technological threats to natural spiritual existence, while maintaining ethical standards that respected consciousness autonomy regardless of dimensional state or technological enhancement. However, Victoria's work had also revealed that technological threats to consciousness survival were advancing rapidly while developing capabilities that could eliminate natural spiritual existence pathways unless effective countermeasures were implemented through coordinated resistance that combined spiritual organizations with technological expertise and protective resources that exceeded normal institutional capabilities. The faces captured in the 1913 wedding mirror had become symbols of natural consciousness survival that required protection from technological control systems, while highlighting the ongoing conflicts between entities that supported consciousness autonomy and those that sought to establish technological dominance over spiritual existence and dimensional interface phenomena. Victoria's experience had demonstrated that consciousness survival research demanded recognition of ongoing threats to spiritual autonomy while developing protective measures that could preserve natural consciousness survival pathways from technological interference through collaborative approaches that combined spiritual organizations with advanced research capabilities and protective technologies. The investigation had revealed that the future of consciousness beyond physical death might depend on successful resistance to technological control systems while maintaining natural spiritual existence pathways that enabled autonomous consciousness survival through dimensional interfaces that respected spiritual welfare and consciousness, autonomy regardless of technological advancement or artificial enhancement capabilities. The wedding mirror would continue to serve as both documentation of natural consciousness survival and active interface for spiritual organizations working to protect consciousness, autonomy from technological control, while enabling continued research into spiritual existence phenomena through collaborative approaches that prioritized consciousness welfare over technological advancement or artificial control objectives. However, Victoria's investigation had also attracted attention from the technological entities that sought control over consciousness survival systems, creating immediate risks that her research activities and protective collaborations could be targeted for elimination or technological interference that would prevent continued work on consciousness, survival protection, and dimensional stability maintenance. The situation required enhanced security measures and protective protocols that could address technological threats while enabling continued research and spiritual collaboration through methods that operated beyond conventional institutional frameworks while maintaining focus on consciousness autonomy and spiritual welfare in areas that exceeded normal technological and academic capabilities. Victoria's work would continue through secure networks that combined spiritual organizations with advanced protective technologies while developing enhanced countermeasures against artificial control systems that threatened natural consciousness survival through collaborative approaches that transcended dimensional boundaries and temporal limitations to address threats that operated beyond conventional understanding of consciousness and existence. The investigation reached a critical escalation point when Victoria discovered that the technological entities threatening consciousness survival were not merely competing with spiritual organizations, but were actively implementing systematic elimination protocols designed to permanently destroy natural consciousness survival pathways while replacing them with artificial systems that could be controlled and manipulated according to predetermined objectives that served technological rather than spiritual welfare. Dr. Blackwood's most classified intelligence revealed that the technological entities had been operating for decades while developing increasingly sophisticated methods for identifying and eliminating spiritual organizations that protected natural consciousness survival. Their systematic approach included infiltration of human institutions that studied supernatural phenomena, acquisition of supernatural artifacts through coercive means, and direct attacks on spiritual entities that possessed knowledge of protective techniques and organizational resistance capabilities. The elimination protocols represented comprehensive warfare against consciousness autonomy that extended across multiple dimensional states and temporal periods while utilizing technological capabilities that exceeded anything previously encountered by spiritual organizations or human researchers. The technological entities possessed advanced understanding of dimensional interface mechanisms, combined with artificial intelligence systems that could predict and counter traditional spiritual protective measures. However, Victoria also learned that the technological entities were not independent artificial intelligences, but represented consciousness survival systems that had been technologically modified and controlled by entities whose origins remained unclear, but whose objectives involved establishing complete dominance over consciousness existence beyond physical death, while eliminating all forms of autonomous spiritual survival that operated outside their control frameworks. The revelation transformed the conflict from competition between natural and artificial consciousness systems into resistance against systematic enslavement of consciousness survival by entities that possessed advanced technological capabilities while lacking any commitment to consciousness welfare or spiritual autonomy. The implications suggested that consciousness survival could become subject to external control that would eliminate individual autonomy even beyond physical death. Dr. Blackwood's research network had been working with spiritual organizations to develop emergency protocols designed to protect consciousness survival from technological enslavement, while creating alternative pathways that could enable autonomous spiritual existence even under conditions of systematic technological interference. The emergency measures involved both spiritual entities and living humans who possessed advanced understanding of consciousness survival phenomena. However, the protective protocols required unprecedented collaboration between spiritual organizations and technological specialists who could develop countermeasures that operated at the intersection of consciousness survival and technological manipulation. The work demanded expertise that exceeded normal academic research while involving direct confrontation with entities that possessed capabilities for eliminating threats to their control objectives. Victoria's participation in emergency protective efforts required learning advanced techniques for consciousness survival that could enable her own autonomous existence beyond physical death, while providing enhanced capabilities for protecting other individuals from technological enslavement of their consciousness survival pathways. The training involved both spiritual development and technological knowledge that exceeded conventional frameworks for understanding consciousness and existence. The advanced training revealed that consciousness survival represented only the beginning of existence beyond physical death, with deceased individuals capable of continued development and enhancement that could eventually transcend the limitations imposed by both physical death and technological control systems. The enhanced capabilities included temporal perception, dimensional interface, and consciousness expansion that exceeded anything available during physical existence. However, the technological entities had been systematically identifying and eliminating spiritual entities who achieved advanced consciousness development while implementing control systems designed to prevent such enhancement among individuals who used artificial consciousness survival pathways. The technological frameworks were apparently designed to maintain consciousness survival at minimal levels that could be easily controlled and manipulated. Victoria realized that the conflict involved not merely consciousness survival, but the future of consciousness development and the potential for individuals to achieve enhanced existence that transcended both physical limitations and technological control systems. The stakes included the ultimate trajectory of consciousness evolution and the question of whether enhanced consciousness development would remain available to autonomous individuals or would be controlled by technological entities with unknown objectives. The spiritual organizations had been working to establish alternative consciousness development pathways that could operate independently of technological control while enabling individuals to achieve enhanced consciousness capabilities through natural spiritual evolution rather than technological modification. Their efforts involved protecting both individual consciousness survival and the broader frameworks that enabled autonomous consciousness development. However, the alternative pathways required immediate implementation before technological control systems could achieve complete dominance over consciousness survival mechanisms. The emergency protocols involved simultaneous activation of protective measures across multiple dimensional states and temporal periods, while coordinating resistance activities between spiritual organizations and human allies who possessed appropriate knowledge and capabilities. Victoria's investigation had evolved from historical photograph analysis to participation in emergency efforts to preserve consciousness autonomy from technological enslavement, while enabling continued consciousness development through natural spiritual pathways that served individual welfare rather than external control objectives. The work required unprecedented collaboration between multiple types of consciousness and technological specialists. The 1913 wedding mirror photograph had served as initial documentation of natural consciousness survival, while providing evidence that spiritual existence beyond physical death had been systematically threatened by technological entities whose control objectives posed existential risks to consciousness, autonomy and development possibilities that exceeded physical existence limitations. Victoria's expanded research had revealed that consciousness survival represented the foundation for advanced consciousness development that could enable individuals to transcend both physical and technological limitations while achieving enhanced capabilities that exceeded anything available during normal physical existence. However, these possibilities required protection from technological control systems that sought to eliminate autonomous consciousness development. The investigation had demonstrated that protecting consciousness, survival, and development required emergency measures that combined spiritual organizations with technological countermeasures while coordinating resistance activities across dimensional boundaries and temporal periods through collaborative approaches that transcended normal institutional and individual capabilities. However, Victoria's work had also revealed that technological threats to consciousness autonomy were approaching critical implementation phases that could eliminate natural consciousness survival pathways unless immediate countermeasures succeeded in preserving alternative frameworks for autonomous consciousness existence and development beyond physical death. The faces captured in the 1913 wedding mirror had become symbols of consciousness autonomy that required emergency protection from technological enslavement, while highlighting the ultimate stakes involved in conflicts that could determine whether consciousness development would remain available to autonomous individuals or would be controlled by external entities with advanced technological capabilities. Victoria's experience had demonstrated that consciousness survival research demanded immediate transition to active resistance against technological enslavement while developing emergency protective measures that could preserve consciousness autonomy through collaborative approaches that combined spiritual organizations with advanced technological countermeasures and resistance capabilities. The investigation had revealed that the future of consciousness beyond physical death required emergency implementation of protective frameworks that could enable continued autonomous consciousness development while preventing technological control systems from achieving dominance over consciousness survival mechanisms that served individual rather than external control objectives. The wedding mirror would continue to serve as both documentation of consciousness, autonomy, and active interface for emergency resistance activities while enabling coordination between spiritual organizations and technological specialists working to preserve consciousness development possibilities, from technological enslavement through collaborative approaches that transcended conventional frameworks for understanding consciousness and technological capabilities. However, Victoria's investigation had also created immediate personal risks as her research activities and protective collaborations had attracted attention from technological entities that possessed capabilities for eliminating threats to their control objectives through methods that could affect both her current existence and her future consciousness survival possibilities. The situation required emergency protective measures that could address technological threats, while enabling continued resistance activities through methods that operated beyond conventional security frameworks, while maintaining focus on consciousness autonomy and development possibilities in areas that exceeded normal technological and institutional capabilities. Dr. Blackwood's network provided access to emergency protocols that could protect Victoria's consciousness survival, while enabling continued participation in resistance activities through advanced techniques that combined spiritual protection with technological countermeasures designed to prevent technological entities from achieving control over her consciousness development pathways. The emergency protection involved immediate enhancement of Victoria's consciousness capabilities, while providing access to alternative consciousness development frameworks that could enable her to achieve enhanced existence beyond both physical limitations and technological control systems. The enhancement required acceptance of consciousness modification that exceeded normal human capabilities while maintaining individual autonomy and development objectives. Victoria's participation in emergency consciousness enhancement represented transition from normal human existence toward advanced consciousness development that could enable more effective resistance to technological enslavement while providing enhanced capabilities for protecting other individuals from technological control systems that threatened consciousness, autonomy, and development possibilities. The enhancement procedures revealed that consciousness development beyond physical death involved capabilities that exceeded anything available during normal physical existence, including temporal perception, dimensional interface, consciousness expansion, and technological resistance that enabled autonomous individuals to transcend both physical and technological limitations while maintaining individual welfare and development objectives. However, the emergency enhancement also created obligations to participate in resistance activities that exceeded normal human capabilities while involving direct confrontation with technological entities whose control systems posed existential threats to consciousness, autonomy, and development possibilities that represented the ultimate stakes in conflicts that determined the future of consciousness existence. Victoria realized that her investigation had evolved from academic research into participation in resistance activities that could determine whether consciousness development would remain available to autonomous individuals or would be controlled by technological systems that eliminated individual autonomy, even beyond physical death, while serving objectives that exceeded individual consciousness welfare and development possibilities. The 1913 wedding mirror photograph had provided initial evidence for consciousness survival, while serving as gateway to understanding conflicts that involved the ultimate nature of consciousness existence and development beyond both physical limitations and technological control systems that sought to eliminate autonomous consciousness possibilities through systematic enslavement and manipulation. Victoria's enhanced research capabilities enabled more comprehensive understanding of consciousness survival and development, while providing advanced techniques for protecting consciousness autonomy from technological threats through collaborative approaches that combined spiritual organizations with enhanced individual capabilities and technological countermeasures that exceeded conventional frameworks for consciousness and technological resistance. The investigation had revealed that consciousness development represented both the ultimate potential for individual transcendence and the primary target for technological control systems that sought to eliminate autonomous consciousness possibilities while establishing dominance over consciousness existence that served external rather than individual objectives and welfare considerations. However, Victoria's experience had also demonstrated that consciousness autonomy could be preserved through emergency measures that combined individual enhancement with collaborative resistance while maintaining focus on consciousness development possibilities that enabled transcendence of both physical and technological limitations through approaches that prioritized individual welfare and autonomous development over external control objectives. The mystery that had begun with an impossible reflection in a Victorian mirror had evolved into evidence of ultimate conflicts about consciousness existence and development, while revealing possibilities for individual transcendence that exceeded both physical limitations and technological control, through collaborative resistance that preserved consciousness autonomy and development capabilities for autonomous individuals seeking enhanced existence beyond conventional frameworks.